And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Hello, I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan, and this is your aviation outlook for the state of Alaska on this Monday, November 3rd, 2025. And looking and to set things up here going into Tuesday, most of the action this upcoming week is going to be along parts of the Aleutians, and then especially here again into the Gulf, because on Tuesday morning and afternoon, an area low pressure will be crossing the central and eastern Aleutians with some gusty winds, where there could be some turbulence and certainly precipitation, mainly in the form of some rain. But then a low is going to come up out of the North Pacific, and it's kind of the initial lead trough is going to brush, especially the outer southern panhandle, and then main batch of moisture is going to move into the western Gulf and then up into Prince William Sound along the eastern Kenai, especially later Wednesday into Thursday, and then that moisture is going to rotate down across Kodiak Island. And there's certainly going to be the potential for some accumulating snow with this. The question is, will we actually get some of that moisture into the Anchorage Bowl area and give some accumulating snow? But that's very possible as we go through Thursday. But in the meantime, starting out Tuesday morning, still areas of IFR covering much of the southwest interior along and west of the Alaska Range that include the Yukon, Kuskokwim basins, the lower, middle, upper, as well as Seward Peninsula. We also find some areas of IFR here, western part of the Copper River Basin, up into the Chugach Mountains, areas like around, will include Sheep Mountain, up into the south side there of Isabel Pass. 40-mile gold country up along the southern eastern facing slopes here of the Brooks Range, and then along the Arctic coast, so pretty extensive. One thing to note, though, is the northeastern Gulf Coast and Panhandle will enjoy some VFR conditions, drier weather, and we potentially see some VFR conditions there in Cook Inlet. But for Tuesday afternoon, still VFR across the southeast, much of the Panhandle, northeast Gulf Coast, and most areas along the Alcan border. Still some lingering MVFR conditions into the western portion of the Copper River Basin, eastern Kenai, Prince William Sound. IFR, though, still holding on here along the Yukon River, the lower portion of it, and Norton Sound back through St. Lawrence Island. And then we do have IFR conditions along the Arctic coast, Beaufort Sea coast, from around Wainwright through Kaktovik, and then down here with that low crossing the Aleutians Tuesday afternoon, we have some IFR conditions, especially in the central eastern Aleutians. For Wednesday morning, IFR conditions expand along much of the western mainland up into the northwest. Pockets of IFR, eastern Alaska Range on up into areas up toward Eagle. Also some IFR conditions along the eastern portion of the Brooks Range, dipping down toward the Yukon River. Still, though, generally VFR conditions anticipated along the Gulf Coast, Panhandle, up into the Copper River Basin and Kenai Peninsula. But then Wednesday afternoon, with that next first initial lead arm of low pressure pushing into the Gulf, we do expect IFR conditions southern half the Panhandle up into the north central Gulf Coast, expanding northwestward into the western Gulf as we go into Wednesday night, Thursday. And this will include some potential for accumulating snow, especially as you get into the coastal mountains. And if that moisture can push inland into the Anchorage Bowl, could see some accumulating snow Thursday. And then eventually that rotates down and could catch Kodiak Island Thursday night into Friday morning. And up here along much of the eastern central interior Alcan border and north slope Arctic coast, IFR conditions are expected Wednesday afternoon. So as we look at the areas in the far north, the east central portion of the Brooks Range, Anatuvik Pass should generally be MVFR. For Tuesday, for Adigan Pass, IFR conditions becoming MVFR. Lake Clark and Merrill generally through the pass and on the east entrance, MVFR, but as you cross over further west, past the west entrances, you'll encounter some IFR conditions Tuesday morning, giving way to MVFR. Same thing, Rainy Pass, generally MVFR conditions through the pass, but the west entrance and beyond, starting out IFR in the morning, giving way to MVFR conditions. Generally, Windy Pass, MVFR. Isabel Pass also should hold on to MVFR conditions, but as you get to the mountains to the west there of Isabel Pass, expect IFR conditions there in the morning. Mentasta Pass will generally hold on to VFR conditions, though as you get past the north entrance, there could be some MVFR conditions there Tuesday morning. Tanita Pass, IFR conditions are anticipated there for the morning, giving way to MVFR. Same thing, Portage Pass, generally IFR conditions giving way to MVFR conditions. And then finally, northern parts of the Panhandle, Chilkoot and Whitewell, and much of the Panhandle will enjoy VFR conditions on Tuesday. Looking at the freezing levels at the surface, we find the surface freezing line running along the Kamchatka Peninsula into the northern Bering, dipping down to around Nunavik Island, Kuskokwim, Bristol Bays, into the north end of the Alaska Peninsula, coming up along areas of the Kenai Mountains there and into the intercoastal mountains of the northern Gulf Coast, into the inner channels there of the Panhandle. Freezing levels of aloft slowly come up to 4,000 feet here from the Gulf into the North Pacific, and then behind me with that other low crossing the central eastern Aleutians on Tuesday. Freezing levels bump upward a bit south of the Aleutian chain, 4, 6, even 8,000 feet, but that warmer air is not coming northeastward. All of this is sliding more toward the east-southeast. So where we do still have some areas of precipitation with this next initial lead arm of moisture and low pressure coming up from the North Pacific into the lower part of the Gulf and brushing, say, Prince of Wales Island. There could be some moderate icing Tuesday with those thicker clouds and some precipitation above, especially 4,000 and 6,000 feet. Lingering isolated or scattered showers along the Gulf Coast in through areas of south central. Could find some icing above 4,000 feet. And then as we get up here into the interior, moisture that's still there along the Brooks Range and east of Kotzebue Sound above 2,000 and 3,000 feet respectively. And then back out here with the low that's crossing the central eastern Aleutians on Tuesday, where we have some thicker cloud cover and precipitation being produced. We find that icing will generally be encountered above 4,000 feet there along and north of the Aleutian chain, and then above 6,000 feet south of the Aleutians. And the jet stream level, we find southwesterly flow into the northeastern Gulf and Panhandle, locally as high as 80 knots near and east of Yakutat. And then coming up across the Alaska Range, maybe 40, 50 knot winds from the south. Behind me, though, we have the low circulation here in the Bering and 90 to 100 knot west-northwest winds just south of the Aleutian chain. And then as we bring it down to 9,000 feet or 700 millibars, then winds locally as high as 50 knots here out through parts of the western central Aleutians. These are tending to rotate southeastward. And then behind me, with that next arm of low pressure rotating north and westward, we could see winds around Dixon Entrance, 35 knots at 9,000 feet or 700 millibars, rising to 40 to 50 knots out here over the North Pacific and southeast part of the Gulf. Now, much stronger as we get down to 3,000 feet. The wind field is pretty strong. Haida Gwaii off to the south and southwest, 50 to 60 knot southeasterly flow. This is going to be pulling back out into the Gulf, so there'll definitely be some stronger winds here over the Gulf for midweek. Just keep that in mind for Wednesday and Thursday. And that will come up along the northern Gulf Coast. We'll see some stronger winds there outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance, Kayak Island. So just be aware of the fact here as we get into Wednesday and Thursday, there will be stronger winds there. Now, this low departing southeastward has its strongest winds along the west and southwest quadrant of the low, 50, 60 knots over the western Aleutians, but that will be all shifting to the south and east as we get into Wednesday and on Thursday. So this translates to, we do anticipate that there will be moderate turbulence across the central and western Aleutians. Could even rule out some maybe isolated severe turbulence, surface to 3,000 feet. And then as we go eastward here into the Gulf, there could be some stronger winds trying to pull into Hinchinbrook Entrance and Prince William Sound, surface to 5,000 feet as the day wears on. And then also some moderate turbulence brushing the southern and western portion of the Panhandle, including Prince of Wales Island up to Port Alexander, Sitka, surface to 6,000 feet. And then one other note, there are some stronger polar easterlies here near and just off the Beaufort Sea coast from Kaktovik and Demarcation Bay. It'll be out here over the water, but there could be some isolated moderate turbulence, surface to 3,000 feet, again offshore of Kaktovik and Demarcation Bay there on Tuesday.